if you're going to try something new, you might hear a voice that's like, oh, you tried this last time and you failed.
So how do you defeat that voice?
You don't. I don't think it's about defeating the voice. It's about acknowledging it and choosing to reframe it.
I asked a friend this morning on a run who has done some pretty rad stuff in her running life and life. If let's say you're struggling with confidence or self-confidence or the ability to do something new or make a change, like how do you use sport to do that? So I'm curious your answer, like how do you use sport to do that?
Yeah. Well, I think first, confidence needs evidence. You need to have a backlog of things that you've done, things that you can look at and say, well, if I did this, I can do this. Like if X, then Y. But the consistency is really important too. And I think a good question to ask yourself if you're struggling with confidence is asking yourself, like, is it confidence or is it courage? Like, are you struggling with confidence or are you struggling with courage? Because if it's courage, then you just, rip the Band-Aid off and see.
Easier said than done.
Easier said than done. A lot of people are afraid of the uncertainty, like I was before I started my program. So if it's courage, that's one thing. But if it's confidence, it needs a lot of evidence.
What if imposter syndrome is a nasty seat at the table?
Yeah, imposter syndrome is brutal and often does have a seat at the table. What is really interesting about mental performance training is that you can get to a point where you hear those voices and you can acknowledge them, but you don't have to listen to them. One thing that I think is really cool about sports psychology is internal family systems is something that we talk about a lot. And basically what that is and how I think of it is like, every emotion has a seat at the table, whether it's anger, jealousy, excitement, what have you. And sometimes in certain situations, those voices will pop up, like the imposter syndrome. You don't belong. You can't do this. What were you thinking? They're there to protect you because they've been helpful in the past or because they've been useful in the past.
The like self-preservation of like, you shouldn't do this because it's easier to stay comfortable and follow a path that versus take a risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if if you're going to try something new, you might hear a voice that's like, oh, you tried this last time and you failed.
So how do you defeat that voice?
You don't. I don't think it's about defeating the voice. It's about acknowledging it and choosing to reframe it. Like, yes, cool. I hear you. Thanks for being here. I don't need you anymore. Like, I got this. And so to get to that point, though, there's a lot of work that happens behind the scenes in terms of self-talk, reframing, focus and concentration, things like that kind of can get you to a point where you can hear it, but not listen to it.
Can running play a role in helping advance that forward?
I think so. Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, running is a microcosm for life. I definitely want to add in the caveat that I do not think that running is therapy. I think running is a great tool in a larger toolbox for these things. But yeah, I mean, there are things like goal setting and like we talked self-talk where you can kind of practice these things during your runs the same way you would practice nutrition and gut training and carb loading. Training those things while you're running can absolutely help.
Can you give a tangible example of if somebody's struggling with some of these emotions, like how to use a run or use a training cycle to build that confidence?
Yeah, we'll do use a training block as an example. Typically 12 weeks, we'll say, let's talk about Black Canyon, right? Black Canyon 100K. If you know the terrain, you know the environment, the weather, whatever.
And oh, do we know it? We both ran it.
We both ran it. Yeah, that's right. So I think all of that. In the same way that you train for specificity on those courses, you can train your mental skills for specificity as well. So kind of getting to a point in a workout where this might be how I'm going to feel at mile 52 or, when you roll through Table Mesa and you've got that 13-mile stretch. This might be how I feel when I'm coming out of Bumblebee and you hit the hills. So kind of putting yourself in those situations that are a little bit uncomfortable and getting used to it and not just getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, but getting curious about why you're uncomfortable and unpacking it. You can do that in training. Like you can periodize your mental skills training the same way you can periodize your physical training. So it's different. It's individualized for everybody. If you wanted to work specifically on self-talk, I'd probably start asking you questions and peppering you with questions about what sort of thoughts are you having specifically when do they pop up? What do they remind you of? What do they sound like? Are there specific things that happen first? How do you feel once you start listening to them? There are definitely reframes and ways to get around it. But I think the ultimate goal, especially with self-talk or mental skills, is to kind of get to a point where if you're going through a hard time in a race, and the gremlins are out and they're loud, not only do you not have to listen to exactly what they're saying, you don't have to believe them either, but getting to a point where you can reframe and talk to yourself the same way you would talk to an athlete that you coach or a close friend or a partner and say what you would say to them in that exact same scenario, just to yourself.
I love that. Let's make it more tangible. So I have had confidence issues in both racing and life. So it appears in a similar manner. To use the racing piece, I have not performed to the level that I think I am capable of for the most part. I've had a couple of races go quite well, but for the majority of it, I ran a 50K in 2023 where I felt awesome the whole time. And I was pushing and I was passing people. And I did a post-race podcast with TJ, who was out there, who also has quite some developed skills in the cognitive and psychological standpoint. And he described that day as like, I performed to my ability or my ceiling and the best of my ability on that day. I don't often feel like I've done that. I did that in a marathon in 2019 when I broke 3 hours for the first time and only time, and in a 5K in 2014 that is still my PR. And I don't know how I haven't beaten that 5K. What I've noticed is that I often go out too fast and fade and crash and burn, and wondering if there's some amount of like self-preservation that exists that's happening there, where if I claim to have taken a risk early and I fail, like at least I took the risk, but perhaps it was like a overly aggressive risk. Like I time trialed a half marathon a few years ago. My first mile was a 6:01. I had no business running a 6:01 first mile in a half marathon. And it was a progressive run with positive splits for 10 miles. And then I picked it up in the last 5K and still PR'd by 2 minutes, but it was like 5 minutes slower than what I was anticipating if I had paced things properly. And in life, I also often have these like confidence challenges despite having the evidence to suggest that like I'm on the right path or I'm doing what I should be doing or I should do what I'm thinking about doing. Are those things similar? Like, is that a pretty consistent trend across the board? And like,
yes, that is normal. And mental skills training can apply to both sport and life. I think like these aren't just skills to use in sport. They are also life skills.
Right. To me, that's like the whole point. Like this running thing is a silly, meaningless journey that we apply and add meaning to it based on how it can be translated into benefiting other aspects of life and just pure enjoyment of being outside.
100%. Yeah. So in sports psychology, there's something called narrative theory. And that basically says that we're not just living our lives. We're not just out there running. We're not just living our lives. We're interpreting them. We're scripting them. We're editing them. And I think oftentimes we kind of start to internalize unhelpful narratives. So like, I'm not fast enough. I'm never going to break X time in a half marathon. I always start out too fast. I'm bad at pacing. I always choke under pressure, like whatever those are. And mental skills can help you reauthor those stories by zooming out and asking yourself, is that really true? Or is that like a rough draft you've never really edited, And in training where you can pull that in is like, okay, what could I have done differently? And if it is pacing, let's practice that in training. But let's also practice the self-talk that goes along with that.
That makes sense. Yeah. The interesting part is that 5K PR is from a time when somebody else knew what my goal was and they paced me to it and I nailed it. I don't know how I was so disciplined that day to like go out slow, and slow was like 6:40 pace that felt easy and simple and like I could run it all day. But it's like, it's fascinating to have these two almost entirely isolated experiences. Plus, I suppose, Crested Butte, which went perfectly for 5 hours. David, my coach, who I know you've worked with in the past, has specifically told me, like, don't write the narrative before the story. Like, don't create the narrative before the story is over. And like, I remember a 7-mile race I did, the Falmouth Road Race, where like, same thing. I went out super hot. I was like, at least I took a risk. And it's just like, I can't figure that part out.
Yeah, it sounds like pacing is definitely puzzle piece here, but I think David's point was really good. Like, don't finish writing the chapter before it's ended. I think athletes are often like really, really incredible at telling everyone else's story accept our own. I think a lot of times we second guess our decisions. Like you said, like there's a confidence thing happening too. I think if we get curious enough to see what's possible, the ending could be like one of those choose your own adventure books. Like, did you try the hard thing? If yes, then go to page 78. And so I think whatever you decide to do in those moments is going to dictate the rest of that chapter. But you kind of have to know who you're going to show up as, like what version of you is going to show up when shit hits the fan and things get dark.
So what do you want to do with this master's degree?
So really cool is like, I want to add in another layer to integrated stride run coaching as like a mental performance piece. Currently, I'm working with 3 teams in Tucson, pretty vague, can't explicitly state who I'm working with, but I'm working with 2 pro teams and a youth team. And I want to keep doing that. The youth team is incredible. They're so curious. They're so excited. They're so engaged. And again, like we were saying, it's not just mental skills, it's life skills. And so, some of these athletes will likely go on and do this for the rest of their lives. It will always be a component. And that's amazing. Some of them will go pro. Some of them will travel the world. Some of them will have these incredible experiences. And then others are just there to have fun because they're like hanging with their buds after school, and that's cool too. So basically, I just want to like help athletes rewrite their stories of potential, right? So if you come in and like we're talking and I ask you like, what's your pie in the sky goal? Like, what is your dream? And someone says, I want to be the best women's soccer player in the league. I want to start at Notre Dame in their soccer program. Cool. What do we need to do to make that happen? Outside of the physical training to make that happen, what do you want to work on? What do you want to focus on? What do you struggle with? What are your strengths? And then we just unpack it from there to give them the tools that they need to be able to, reset after making a mistake or, work through negative self-talk or blend into a new team dynamic. That's a huge one too. I want to integrate it into everything because I think it's super important. And I think like the more we talk about mental skills and I guess these like tools that we can use, the less stigmatized it is to talk about having a hard time or to talk about, these struggles that we all go through because life is hard. Adulting is hard. And just being able to have open conversations about that, I think are really helpful because more likely than not, you're going to run into someone who says, me too, I'm experiencing the same thing. And if you can get curious about that and you can sort of lean on trusted friends or trusted support groups, you can work through it in a really healthy and helpful way that doesn't just apply to sport. You can use it through the lens of running, certainly, but also through the lens of like corporate advertising, family dynamics, relationships, how you respond when someone cuts you off in traffic. It touches everything.
Yeah, it's one of the main reasons I love having this podcast, which is the exploration of all these components of what make us human. And then thousands of people listening have a chance to experience or connect with somebody who might be struggling, succeeding, or somewhere in between in a similar way and feel like they're part of it. Like if I wanted to have a running podcast that was the most popular running podcast, I wouldn't talk about these things, but I also wouldn't find as much meaning in the conversations that I do get to have and that I do host on this podcast. And so it's like, it's a niche within a niche. And it's like my favorite way to explore our niche of running.